Seven on Sundays podcast is intended for mature audiences. Episodes discuss sensitive and fraught topics that many teens and 20-somethings face, but may be triggering. The content may not be suitable for all audience members. Please take caution when listening.
Even though we were not supposed to watch porn, every dude was watching porn to some degree, and then feeling shame and guilt over doing that because it's sinful and wrong, and trying to fight against that. Right. And then marriage day comes, you get hitched, you go to your hotel room, and then it's like all bets are off and she's going to be performing for you like you've seen in the movies, kind of a deal.
Hello and welcome to Seven on Sundays, the podcast about how young adults are navigating sex, relationships, and life today.
We are your hosts, Dr. Shez Leby and Stephanie Boy, and each week we will share our candid conversations with young adults and experts about today's tough topics.
Hello, listeners. Thank you so much for joining us today. Dr. Shez and I will be talking to Drew about purity culture. And this is an amazing insight to any of us who grew up with very strict Christian sort of values that made us feel shameful or guilty about sex or relationships, and how that impacts us in our longer term relationships, but also in the way we carry ourselves early on in our sort of experimental relationships, if you will. I am going to just read a quick definition of purity culture for anyone who is not aware. And while this is not the same definition for Catholics, you will be able to relate to a lot of what it's saying. Anyway, purity culture is a set of evangelical Christian beliefs that emphasize strict gender roles, abstinence, and modesty. The basic teachings stress that abstinence-only mentality for both men and women. Individuals learn to view sexual activity as reserved for marriage, and leaders discourage dating to avoid such temptations. Unfortunately, the purity culture movement perpetrates unhealthy ideas of sexuality, often leading to long-term mental health impacts. Now, obviously, that's someone's opinion on it, but we're going to talk to Drew and hear what he says. And I can say, as a Catholic, knowing many Catholics, we often do say that we have like a Catholic hangover, or we are very well aware of shame and guilt that surrounds any sort of, premarital sex and relationships. So let's jump in with Drew and hear his story.
Welcome to the show, Andrew, and you can just dive in with what you're here to talk about today.
Thanks so much for having me. So I grew up going to church and being raised in a purity culture environment, which basically means that we were taught that sex before marriage was wrong, it was bad, it was sinful. And then sex within the context of marriage was like all bets are off. Anything is on the table. And in the environment I grew up in, it was very much a heterosexual kind of outline being laid before us. And so that also meant that your partner, as a man, your partner was basically your personal porn star. And so I grew up going to Southern Baptist Church, and so that was preached that entire time. And then in high school, moved to a non-denominational church where a lot of that rhetoric was just continued. And then down the line, after going to college, getting a girlfriend, and then later getting married, having to unlearn a lot of that, because that's just not the reality of how sex works. While I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about and share, this story kept coming to my brain. And so when I was about 14, 15, really in the thick of puberty, when sex is like all a guy can think about, my church had these things that they called purity conferences. And basically it was a day-long event, and all of the high school kids, sometimes the junior high kids, would go to these things. It was literally a day of teaching why sex is bad, why it's sinful, and how it makes God sad, basically. And so during that, it's a mixed session, but they do a breakout session, and they take the guys into one room and they take the girls into another room. And I have no idea what they told the girls, but I know for the guys, the example they laid before us was they pulled out an apple pie and they asked everyone in the room, who wants a slice of apple pie? And all hands raise up. Yeah, sure. Sounds great. And then the leader takes his index finger and sticks it in the middle of the pie. And then he pulls it out. He says, okay, who still wants a slice of pie? And most hands still raised, maybe a few people not interested. So then he takes his whole hand and he kind of like mushes the pie up and mixes it up. And it now looks like an apple crumble. And he asks again, now who wants a slice of pie? And more hands are going down in the room. There's still a lot of people that are like, fine, we trust this guy. He washes his hands, not a big deal. And then he spits a loogie into the pie and mixes that into the pie. And now really nobody wants the pie. And so the example that he was giving was that all of these things were steps along the way of women being used in a sexual way, right? So sticking your finger in maybe represented like hand holding and a little bit of kissing, and mushing the pie up maybe was more of like heavy petting. And then him hooking a loogie into it was him being like, this is what a girl who has had sex before marriage is like, this used, disgusting apple pie. And I remember sitting there and being really uncomfortable with that fact. As guys, we weren't really taught that was for us what sex before marriage, like we weren't a used apple pie. It was mostly women. And I remember thinking that was wrong, but also still being like, well, I trust these people, right? Why would they teach me something that's wrong? And so that kind of sticks with you. When I got to dating and I started to hang out with girls and get to know them and would find out, oh, this girl's maybe slept around a little bit or whatever, you look at that person in a different light. You look at them as more of a used object. And again, it's looking at women as an object as opposed to a human being who has experiences and things like that. So that really always stuck with me. And again, in addition to those things being taught, like sex before marriage was bad and looking at porn was bad, and that men are these lustful, uncontrollable animals, really, that we can't control our thoughts and emotions. And yet we're somehow supposed to not have sex, and we're not supposed to look at women in a sexual way, and we're not supposed to do any of these things until we find that one partner. And once we do and we get married, all bets are off. And so when I did eventually meet my person, it was weird to finally have sex and like have to unlearn that like sex is a pleasurable thing for both parties. And so what does that look like for her? And it took quite a while to get there, but we got there. And so it's been a steady unlearning process to kind of unwind some of these things that have just been baked into my brain for decades of my life. So yeah, that's the majority of my story, I guess.
Wow. I'm just going to say that I have heard the gum story and I have never heard the pie story. And you said that this isn't maybe much of a story as much as some of our other guests. And I would actually argue that story actually made me sad. I felt like I wanted to cry. Like I was like, I literally can't believe that young women are being held up to be responsible for all of this. It actually makes me really sad because we hear young men talk about like hooking up and hookup culture and how common that is. And I know that many of the young men that go to the college where I teach, which is in the Bible Belt, have been raised in some form of purity culture. While it's the purity culture by name hasn't really been around since the 90s, I guess. But you were young. And so I know you're like 26. So I assume that like that was like the tail end of purity culture. I don't know. Did they actually call it purity culture?
I don't know that they necessarily called it purity culture. We were called to be pure. And at the time, a lot of the, like, I believe it was like Josh Harris had written some books. I'm trying to remember the names of them, but they were basically calling for young men to be pure, right? And to live these like uber pure lives of like no pornography and no like watching R-rated movies and no like all of this whole checklist of these things that were like sinful and disgusting, essentially. It was like really bizarre. And I remember reading that book and being like, what? Like, and asking my dad about it. And he struggled with things too. He had grown up in the Bible Belt. And so we were kind of on this weird journey together in a lot of ways of like having to deal. I know there's also a book called Every Man's Battle, and there's an Every Young Man's Battle book out there, which specifically deals more with like pornography and things. But him and I both wrestled with these, like how it never felt like there was 100% steps on like how to get there. It was just, you are called to do this thing. And so I think that's what was always confusing for the two of us is like we're like waiting for that 7-step process, right? If you're an alcoholic or a drug abuser, there's processes that you take to get out of these things. And so it never felt like it was always just you are called to be much more. You are expected of this. Yeah, but I'm struggling with this. So how do I be better if I don't have the tools to be better?
And it's asking you, well, they're asking you to suppress a natural part of being human. They're asking you or saying to you, going as far as it's a sin to have any natural sexual thoughts or development or desires, which are all a natural part of humanity, right? Animals to
Yes.
humans. So the confusion is big. And with the pie example, I've heard the sneaker one, but the pie one is new to me too. And with the pie one, what I wonder as a male is then you guys are set up to be like the pie destroyers. Like you're destroying this beautiful pie. You're the loogie makers, which is, what does that say to this process? It's really, that must be
Yeah.
difficult.
I remember thinking too that if sex equals hucking a loogie into an apple pie, right? Then like as soon as I have sex with a woman, she's ruined, right? And so even if
Right.
she's my partner,
I'm
she's
ruining
then
that.
spoiled. I'm ruining her and she's spoiled goods.
Right.
And so that always felt weird too, where it was like, but that is not what I had seen exemplified in like marriages around me, right? They weren't like married women weren't these like destroyed objects. They were still wonderful, sweet women who, they had partnerships that were a lot of times more 50-50 than I don't know, I took it to be. I don't know. So it was just this weird, like I didn't look at them as destroyed objects, but that's yet how I was thinking about it because well, they've obviously had sex, they have kids. So are they a destroyed object? I don't know. Like and again, there's those questions. And at a young age, you feel embarrassed to ask certain things because it's taboo, right? And in church, typically, you don't want to talk about sex. It does not get talked about because it's a big gray area. It's a big no area. And hopefully that's changing. But yeah, it was not something that got talked about a lot. And so it was just kind of like, oh, just keep those questions to yourself and move on.
But even still, like, I guess I'm a big, like, I can't stand slut shaming. It's like one of my triggers. But I even like Dr. Shez is saying, this is like you're set up to not sin because of your natural urges, but it's
Right.
actually not even really like the sin falls on you. It's like they're literally putting the sin really on the female. She's the one who's destroyed. And I know that part of purity culture, and we're just going to call it purity culture, even if that's a certain time frame that you don't really fall into that time frame. We're just going to call it purity culture because we all know what we're talking about. Catholic Church, Dr. Shez and I both grew up Catholic. We had something similar. It's a lot of shame, a lot of guilt around sex, a lot of that whole idea of being used and not being like worthy once you've been used, like a chewed up piece of gum. So we all know what we're talking about. But this idea that women hold the responsibility and that they're the ones that are I saw like this TikTok as I'm researching for this, and this girl's like, "This is how I keep my boyfriend from wanting to sin." And she's like, "I don't wear things that reveal my breasts. I don't wear things that reveal my legs." And I'm just like, I don't know. It's just so much like Islamic culture. Like men can't control themselves. Like we are still operating on this idea that men have no agency when it comes to sex. It's just all animal instinct. It just takes over, and that somehow women do. It also negates our own sexual needs and desires as females, as if our sexuality, our sex drive doesn't exist. And if it does, we're able to control it. It's not the same as men's. It's just, it sets us up for so many ideas when we actually are in a healthy relationship. And it literally does take a year, 2 years, 3 years of marriage to break down all of these ideas that you've been given.
Yeah, something that you hit on there that I think is really it resonates with me because so in addition to growing up In church, I grew up as a homeschool kid and in a homeschool community of friends. And a lot of those families had chosen homeschooling because for religious reasons. And but the girls within that group, a lot of them, yeah, modest was hottest was like a big thing we talked about. And so I remember even for my sister, who is she's a very tall person, has very long legs. Finding clothes for her was very difficult to the point where she learned to sew clothes so that she could dress modestly. And that has really messed with her brain in a lot of ways. Now, as an adult, now she's like, well, I just buy clothes. But she doesn't feel that desire to always have to be 100% covered up the way we did. Because there was rules associated with school dances and field trips and whatever, where it's like if a girl showed up wearing anything. I went to prom with a girl who we showed up and I thought her dress was completely fine. And so did her parents. And they immediately made her put on a jacket over her dress. But guys, we never had that. Like we could wear short shorts to the beach and we could go shirtless at the beach and things like that. Like we could show all the skin we wanted, which if the female sex drive is anything like we're told that the men's sex drive is, where men, I know we're much more visual creatures and women are not quite as much, but there is a visual component to it. And so it's like, well, if we're at the beach shirtless, all our bodies out, why can it not be the other way? And so that was always a question too. As we got older, we started to question more of why is it not? It's a double standard in a lot of ways. And like you said, putting that burden of like on women to basically hold the responsibility of like it is your job to keep men pure. No, it's our job as men to have control over our thoughts and our actions, right?
And setting up those gender roles in that clear, definitive way, which is just simply not true, but setting those up in that way that women do not have desire and men's desire is out of control, that is really hard to grapple with because, like you said, and I'm so curious about this, then you were directly taught that once you're married, all bets are off. So what does that mean? It's giving you permission to be as wild as possible and as unleash the dragon, whatever that is, once you're married. And so how does that get modulated or understood in any way? And then growing up with the conditioning of sex equals sin. So sex equals I'm bad or you're dirty or defiled or messed up pie. Where do you reconcile all those things once married? So that's a big topic that you opened up. So is it that you were basically openly taught that, hey, once you're married, then you can do anything you want?
Yeah, I thankfully I had parents who gave a little bit more of a sexual education where they were like consent was important, right? And then also there was a discussion element, right? Of like, hey, we're going to do these things. Or we're going to try this or we're going to whatever. And so thankfully I had parents who were like that. And so that helped to some degree of understanding that it's like, okay, like there's going to be a discussion before before sex happens, kind of a thing. I grew up thinking girls never watched porn, right? That was like a guys only type of thing. And even though we were not supposed to watch porn, every dude was watching porn to some degree. And then feeling shame and guilt over doing that because it's sinful and wrong and trying to fight against that. And then marriage day comes, you get hitched, you go to your hotel room, and then it's like all bets are off, and she's gonna be performing for you like you've seen in the movies, kind of a deal. And it's like there's that like, but how does she know? Because she's never seen this before. So she just instinctually knows that, it's like, what? And there was a lot of questions around that type of thing because it was just like, this doesn't, when you really look at it from a logical perspective, you're going, this doesn't add up, right? It doesn't make sense that anybody just knows instinctively how to do this. Like I said, I was thankful I had parents who were like, no, there's like a discussion and it's going to be really awkward and it's going to be really like, you know, the first time is not crazy magical. It's really awkward and weird, but that's okay. And then it gets better and better and better. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. So I think really, like I said, I had parents who did that for me, but I know friends that didn't have that in their marriage night. They had a rude awakening.
Wow.
Yeah, I think that probably leads to a lot of disappointed. Well, first of all, obviously, porn today is vastly different than anything that was represented even a generation ago, 15 years ago. So this expectation put on women, especially as guys have been watching porn, that they're going to be anything close to a porn star. And then sadly, when you watch so much porn, that's the ideas that you have. And then probably the girl is thinking, okay, it's going to be something sweet, like she's seen in a romance movie or something like that, a rom-com. And so you come with two completely different ideas about what that looks like, which is just like setting you up for failure, really. So I'm glad that your parents did talk about that, but there is no sex education. There's no communication about how to talk, sexual communication in purity culture. My questions, Drew, would be, what are the messages given? Like you said, porn is something that they say you shouldn't do, but then everybody's doing it. What do they say? Are there different ideas for women and men? Like, obviously, most of our culture doesn't think that women watch porn. Are there different responsibility? Like, is masturbation, like, what do they say about masturbation? Like,
That's a great question because, yeah, that was another aspect of like some people thought it was okay. Some people didn't think it was okay. I was taught it wasn't okay. But at the same time, like, I, when I had been sat down to have the talk by my father to be like, this is what sex is, and here's the birds and the bees, and your body is going through changes, and you will have these things. There was this emphasis that, like, your body, you're going to have nocturnal emissions, was really like the thing. So it'll take care of itself because, the male body has to relieve itself of that like buildup. As a hormonal teenager, you are having an erection from a gust of wind. And so, like, you're like, and that's embarrassing, right? You're doing nothing wrong or nothing in a sexual way. And all of a sudden you're like, I have a hard on, and like, let me go to the bathroom. How do I get rid of this? And so it's hard because then there's that shame and that guilt associated with, well, what I'm doing is sinful. Even if you're not watching porn while you're masturbating, if you're just doing it to like be like, I got to get rid of this. I'm in public. I'm with whatever. Like, I'm gonna run to the bathroom and take care of my shit and then come back. There's a shame associated with it where you come back and you just feel like sinful and disgusting. And that was even a debate within my friends of like, some of us believe that it was fine and some of us believe that it was not cool. They didn't explicitly go hand in hand, like I said, but there's like there was, that was, again, it was confusing because there was teachings that said it's wrong and there was teachings that said, oh no, it's fine. Like, masturbation without porn, totally cool. Just use your imagination, kind of a thing. And that is also dangerous.
yeah. What about for women? Were there any explicit, I guess if there were not explicit about men, there was maybe it was just an assumption that women wouldn't masturbate.
I didn't know that women watched porn or masturbated until I was probably 19 years old, 18 years old. I was in college and I remember sitting with a group of friends and we were talking about stuff and porn came up. And one of the girls we were with just flat out said, like, oh yeah, I've watched porn and have watched it consistently. And I was shocked. I was like, what are you talking about? This is like, that's a guy thing. So yeah, it was like not ever talked about. It was just kind of, going back to that like purity culture event, that breakout session of like, we're going to separate the guys and take them into one room, or separate the girls and go into another room. That event, there's no sexual education. It's just a like, don't do this. And from what I've gathered from the girls is like their breakout session was really just a like, it's your responsibility to keep men pure and like guard your own thoughts and whatever. But there was never this like, porn is wrong for women, or it is wrong, but like, you don't really have to worry about it because you're not going to be watching it anyways. And so it was this weird, again, I wasn't in that room, but it was just this like expectation that women are not watching porn. That's a men's problem. And that's, again, that's not true, but it shapes how you're thinking about it. And so I know I have female friends who, when they talk about, yeah, I watch porn and yeah, I've mashed to it and things like that, but you feel this weird, they have felt this weird pressure or shame or guilt around that because they're like, I'm not supposed to be doing this because it's a guy's only thing. And so they have an additional layer of like, guys, we just have to deal with the guilt of like, what we're doing is wrong. They have an additional guilt of like, what I'm doing is wrong. I must be weird because I'm the only woman who's actually doing this.
No, you're 100% right. They actually do feel like that.
I have a question, Drew, for parents and for, I'll call them educators, but church pastors or whatever. Do you feel like the sin path, this fear-based education worked? Did it help curb anybody's behavior?
I think there was some fear associated with like dating and being in a relationship because then it needs to be a godly relationship. It needs to follow all these rules, and there needs to be chaperones, and there needs to be all of these things. And like I had a friend who she dated in high school, and when she would go on dates, they had to take a chaperone with them. And I always thought that was really weird. And I didn't date in high school. I had female friends, but we were not dating. There was nothing really sexual about it. And so when I got to college was when I started dating. But I was like, I'm in college. I'm an adult at this point. I don't need a chaperone to go on a date with me. But I always thought that was weird that their families never trusted them to do those things. And even when I started dating my wife and I brought her home to visit, we went to a 4th of July event with childhood friends, and my parents left, and these other homeschool parents were there, and they were like, "Oh, don't worry, we'll be your chaperone." And we're like, "What are you talking about?" Like, we went out last night to dinner and my parents didn't come. We go on dates. We're adults. We're 18, 19 years old. Like, we're adults. We don't need you to chaperone us. And they're like, "Yeah, but it's just to make sure like you're being appropriate. We're dating. Like, what is inappropriate about this? I'm not about to have sex in front of you at a fireworks display. Maybe we're gonna hold hands and do a peck on the cheek or something, but like, what?" you know? And so that was the weird aspect as well of like that, dating. And but yeah, like I said, I think there was a fear associated with it. And when people did have sex before marriage, it was really shamed. I was like difficult to watch friends that I thought were safe people completely ostracize somebody for having sex before marriage, getting pregnant before marriage.
The
As it is.
hypocrisy is very deep on both,
Yes.
like in the Catholic Church too. It's like
Yes.
hypocrisy. I think it's like as an adult, I find it very strange the obsession that Christians have over sex. Every Christian denomination has it. It's really weird. They're so obsessed. And I'm not saying that sex isn't something that's sacred, but the weird shit that they make up that just hangs on for so long in relation to sex is just unhealthy. Like they've taken it to an unhealthy level. Like the fact that you would need a chaperone as an adult bonkers. So I have a question. Do you think that people get married younger in purity culture because they want to be able to have sex?
I think yes and no. So I had sex before I was married, but I'm with that partner. I've only ever been with one partner. And we did get married young. Well, we got married at 22, 27 now. So we've been married for 5 years. And it's interesting because one of the things I talked about recently was like this feeling of pressure that I wanted to be with this person and move in and see how life would be living with this person after college. But I felt like if I was going to do that, it had to be within the context of marriage still. And I had already separated from religion and church, but there was still this pressure that it's like, well, if I don't do this, then people are going to like look at my parents a certain way, or they're going to look at me a certain way. That was dumb. I don't regret getting married, but there is that like, I felt a little pressured to kind of like, just do it. You want to be with this person. I have other friends that they got married at 18. They were like really quick with it. And it's very obvious that they got married because their natural urges were just like they needed to quench that. It's difficult to watch because to me, I look at that and I go, well, just have sex. Like just, do something about it. You don't have to rush into marriage to like quell that fire. And I don't know, it was a mix. I have like my friends are kind of a 50-50 split of like half of us got married really young and the other half like are still not married. And like I said, we're like 27-ish. So it's about a 50-50 split.
Listen, I say all of this not to disrespect people who have values of no sex before marriage, because I actually think that's a really beautiful thing when people do that. I just think that there's such extremes. And I think that there's like a middle ground too. It's like just because you have sex doesn't mean you're going to go hog wild and just into like full on hookup culture, one night stands, all that kind of stuff. I do think that there's a certain like we have to know ourselves. We have to understand what we're getting into and how we feel about those types of situations. And are we a kind of person who prefers to be in long-term committed relationships, whether that's marriage or whatever, and whenever that happens in your life? But there definitely are extremes. And I think getting married, I have seen that firsthand how people get married sometimes young because they want to have sex, and that is really a disaster. All that said, there is a lot of truth also. Like, we can look at it like there are two parts of it. It's dialectical. You can have two things that are true, right? Like, two things that are true at the same time. For example, what you just said about moving in. There are so many studies that show that moving in together before you're married, cohabitating before you're married, is actually very destructive to the relationship. And that has nothing, like, that's been studied outside of any kind of religious context. So there is a little bit of truth. Like, we kind of have to find a middle path. There's a book I just listened to, which is amazing, called The Case Against the Sexual Revolution, that talks about women in hookup culture and how it really doesn't serve women. So there is a lot of truth to these things. It's just that it's taken to the extreme. And that's what I think is, like, so weird, because you're giving these kids hangups. And I do think that the answer to this is having these discussions. What is it? Sex does feel good. What is it that you want? What are you looking for? And when you really remove every single option that kids have for sexual release, like masturbation, I'm just going to use masturbation, or even mutual masturbation, right? Because I think in purity culture, you're not even really supposed to date anyone unless that's a person that you can actually see yourself marrying. Is that true, or is that more like the 90s purity culture?
That was pretty true in my circle as well. It was like, write your list of what your perfect partner looks like. And then once you find that person, like, befriend them, and then you're going to date them. And you're only ever going to date one person. And that's
Yeah.
your person. And it's
Like
like,
that.
it's wild. My mom told me, I was thankful again for my parents, because my mom was like, that's utter bullshit. She's like, go on dates, get to know people. That's what it is. You're going, you're having fun. You don't got to make out. You just go, you have fun, you go get drinks, you go to the movies, you go do whatever. You're just friendly, you have fun. There's a little bit of that, like, a romantic context around it, but there's not an expectation that this is your person.
I don't think that Dr. Shez, you probably didn't know that. That's part of purity because I had no idea until I started doing the research for this conversation. I was like, wait, you can't even date someone that you're not intending to marry? That is just seriously bonkers.
There's also a level of, like, you have to go to the parents and you have to ask permission. Like, I'm interested in your daughter, or I'm interested, and it's always the guy. It's put on the guy to do this. I'm interested in getting to know your daughter. Okay. And then comes in the chaperone part, where it's like, well, let's go on a double date, or we'll go with you guys and we'll go to the movies or whatever. And it's like awkward and weird. And I had mothers and fathers who came up to me and were like, I would let you date my daughter. And I'm like, while I'm flattered and thank you, I don't need your permission to do that. I'm a little traditional in the sense that I feel like I need your permission to marry your daughter, but not to date them. That's their decision.
Drew,
Yeah.
did your wife grow up in the same church or the same kind of culture?
No, not at all.
Okay, that's what I was wondering.
She grew up much more in a household where it was like, go to church on like Easter, Christmas kind of a thing. But she does not have the same hang-ups that I do around certain things. And I think, to Stephanie's point a little bit, is like, when a person who's been raised in that Christianese culture, once you kind of, I'm going to say escape that, but once you kind of break some of those thought processes down, that's when people tend to go over the deep end and into something like a hookup culture, because they've been taught no sex, no sex, no sex, right? And then once you break down that, you're like, oh, well, I'm okay with having sex before marriage. That's fine. But then they go hard into a hookup culture where it's meaningless sex with this person and that person and whoever. And so I agree with you that I think there's a middle ground to be taught, where it's like, you genuinely, sex is a magical thing. And it is something that I think should be reserved for someone who's special.
I feel like if you have conversations with your kids, and this is obviously what Dr. Shez and I advocate, like, I had conversations with my kids, and I remember my mother saying, you need to tell them to be abstinent. And I would be like, I refuse. I actually refuse to say that to them. I was like, I'm not going to tell them that. I'm going to tell them how valuable they are. I'm going to tell them how much I love them. I'm going to tell them that they are worthy of someone treating them with absolute dignity and respect. And I am going to tell them that's how they have to treat other people. That is what I'm going to tell them, because I was taught abstinence. All of my cousins and everybody in my family was taught abstinence. And I don't know anybody who didn't have sex when they were young. And so these conversations, maybe it's the middle ground, But I really believe that human beings have the right to choose the path that they walk, given all of the information, and letting them know how much you love them, how deserving they are of honoring their inner voice, of honoring their bodies, and all of that kind of stuff. And not shaming masturbation, not shaming all of these things. You have natural urges. In my opinion, it's like masturbation can help you to have a clear brain when you're thinking, trying to figure out, do I want to have sex with this person? Sometimes it just gets so heated that you're like, oh, let's just go for it, right? But masturbation is like, okay, hold on. This is getting really hot. I can walk away. I can do this. It's so sad to me that there are no steps in how do I get from this mindset that I want to hold off having sex until it's someone very special in my life. But how do I get there? How do I get there? Honoring other human beings, honoring myself, staying true to what it is that I'm looking for in life and how I want to live. I don't know.
What's so interesting about what you said, Drew, and Steph, I love that you're saying this. It's not only did you not know the steps, but like you're not even allowed to think about entering the steps because it will, quote unquote, make God sad, which is, whoa, that's so big. Or it'll be a sin. And so you're a really bad person. So that's where, and we grew up with that too, Steph, that same thing. But it's so interesting that we're not even allowed to talk about or think about entering the staircase, never mind have these steps. So this is where things can be revamped. And that's why I asked if it worked, because yes, Steph, in our families, in our situations, it didn't work. And yes, there were people that got pregnant. Yes, there were people that probably got all kinds of infections and things. How do we know? But what I love that you said, Drew, and I ask if you're willing to answer this, how would you, so you were taught of what a quote unquote godly relationship is. And I think that those words are actually beautiful because when we are in a true reciprocal relationship, it is a sacred thing. It is a beautiful, I don't know if I'd say it's godly, but I think it is a godly gift that we're able to have relationship with others, whether that's sexual or not. How would you describe today, knowing what you know, a godly relationship or a really beautifully healthy, sacred, loving relationship?
That's a good question.
That's a big one.
It's a big question, but it's really good because I think that what I grew up understanding from watching my family dynamics of both like my parents and my grandparents and my aunts and my uncles and their relationships, I was able to take things and be like, I don't like these things. So I don't want to mimic those things. But I do want to mimic these good things. And some of those good things were to let your person, your partner be themselves. You play to each other's strengths. And I think when you find your person, that is the discovery of like being in a relationship with somebody is you figure out their strengths, right? And then how to play to them. And so learning that with my wife of like, she's really good at this. So I let her do that. Even if it is stereotypically a man job or a masculine job, which like, whatever, that's its own conversation within itself, but, and so like I enjoy doing housework. And so I take a lot more of that on and that's fine. I enjoy doing that. She doesn't enjoy doing that. And so we've found that balance with each other where we know that it's like a way for me to serve you is to have the dishes clean, to have dinner on the table, to have whatever it is. And so when she gets home from work, boom, it's good to go. That's a little bit of a twist on traditional family values, but we've found more of a mutual place to like meet each other. And it's a continual thing because as people, we continue to grow and you have to continue to work on your relationship. We are very different people from 22 to 27. We've learned a lot in those 5 years. We've learned a lot about each other. And so being okay with the fact that it's like, you cannot get stuck on like, well, this is how it was. Well, it's not that way anymore. Okay, well, we have to talk about it. And everyone always says the cliche, like communication, 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 but like it truly is like conversations with people help shape how you act and how you live and how you view the world, right? And so having those on a daily, weekly basis of like, we have tough conversations all the time, but we always frame it, we tend to put it in the context of like, something fun comes after it, right? So if it is a deep, dark conversation, we do something fun after it, to lighten the mood. And I don't know. I hope that kind of answers your question of like our relationship just tends to be like we try to meet each other where we're at and give each other like the space to be independent, but also come together and to really sink into like what we're good at and find that. And then where there's weak spots, we figure out how to plug those holes.
You nailed that answer. Are you kidding me? That was like 10 beautiful, healthy relationship definers. That was awesome. So you have worked at it and you had good role models, it sounds like, but you didn't have permission to explore things. You didn't add anything about a healthy sexual relationship, and that would be good to add. But again, communication is part of that and everything else you might say, but those are very godly, gorgeous, perfect relationship aspects. So love that. What would you add as far as healthy sexual relationship?
That's a good question. That's something we talk about and work on constantly of like, what does that look like? Because everyone's needs are different, right? And some people have a very active sex drive and some people don't. And so it's important and it's an important thing to talk about constantly. And we've been married for 5 years. We've been together for 7 years, I want to say. Actually, maybe longer, might be 8. 7.5, we'll split the middle. 7.5 years. And our sex life has changed drastically during that time. There are times where it's like hot and heavy all the time. And then there are times where it's slower and life is stressful and, it's harder to find time or whatever. But it is important to make the time and it is important to like, again, have discussions around what do you need from me and how do we get there? One thing I've learned from just my own personal experience is that like, and from talking with my friends is that a lot of times men need sex to be intimate with somebody and to want to have those like really deep intimate conversations. And a lot of times women need an intimate conversation and experience to enter into like a sexual relationship. And so finding that balance between how do we give each other both of those things is tricky. It's not easy. But again, it's like conversations, conversations, conversations. And eventually you get there.
And
And
by the way, that
educate.
never ends.
Exactly. And educate yourself is important. I didn't have the best sex education. I'm thankful I had parents who taught me about consent, but even listening to this podcast and hearing about certain aspects of like what is consent, I'm like, oh, well, that's a new concept for me. But educating yourself and finding people who are experts in that area to listen to and hear and like it's an ever evolving thing, right? And so educate yourself. Just like do it. Don't rely on just one thing. Go like seek out advice, even if you don't take it. It's like it's important to hear different perspectives on things.
Can I just ask you before we wrap up, because you have great tools. So you're either like super intuitive or maybe you've gotten some information. Have you ever talked to a therapist about this or have you read any books that you feel like, because I feel like you kind of have to decondition yourself from the way you were raised. I had to do that a lot. My husband was an atheist growing up. I was raised Catholic. We had very vastly different ideas about a lot of things, but the whole idea of shame around sex was something he could not even wrap his brain around. And just as a funny aside, my mother, even though I was pregnant when we got married, my mother, we would go home to my home in Philadelphia before the wedding, and my mother would make us sleep in different rooms. Like, I'm like, really? Like, I'm pregnant and I'm getting married, So there's like, that was like the continual shame that's actually levied on you. So there is a lot of deconstructing ideas that you have to do. So did you read anything great or are you just super smart and intuitive?
I'm a genius. No. No, so
You
I deconstruct
are. You are the laughing matter.
I deconstructed my faith in college. So that was anywhere from like 2014 to 2017-ish. Started deconstructing my faith, which really was just like asking questions about like, is this true? Is this not true? And that unravels a lot of other things, right? And so once you start to spiral, then it's like, okay, well, I got to find understanding of these things. But when it came to relationships and it came to the sexual element of it and like getting over the first time I had sex, again, out of was not in the context of marriage for about 4 days afterwards, I felt dirty and disgusting and really gross about myself. And I felt like I'd let myself down. I had let my partner down, let my parents down, and weird ways, and just like sitting with that and like, what do I do with this information, or what do I do with these feelings? I've done very little therapy. I know I need it because we're all broken people, and I think, seeing an expert is good. But when I started to research, a podcast is my thing. So I listen to a lot of deconstruction podcasts, and some of them would then point you in direction, especially around sexual. But for me, there were two books that I think were really good, and I need to re-listen to them. They're on my reading list for this year. But Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski was like a really good book. And then the other one was She Comes First by Ian Kerner, was another one that was recommended to me. And that one is much more about like female pleasure and female like orgasm and things like that, and understanding that as a man, because it's very different. And so those two helped me like unpack that porn like viewing of like porn is very male dominated, male focused, of like his pleasure, his pleasure, his pleasure. And so trying to steer away from that and get into what is female pleasure was important. But yeah, just like it was just finding things that like helped give me different perspectives on things, and listening. I also went hard into like studying other religions and their takes on sexuality and sin and that kind of thing. And so it's hard. It's been a long journey and it's still ever changing of like what my beliefs are around things. But yeah, unpacking that shame was like a really big part of it, and not feeling guilty about I'm going to do these things and that's okay.
These are two books that Stephanie I know they're where they are on her bookshelf. I know but what a Renaissance man. Drew, this is so, so important for young men to hear that you, as an amazing role model, are actually buying, listening again for a second time. You're telling us these two books. I cannot applaud you like standing O, literally. Cannot say enough about thank you for being that kind of role model that you are to your friends and to the male population in general. This is huge. This is really big. And the way you're deconstructing shame, which I know how Stephanie feels about shame, and shame is something in therapy constantly it's dealt with. So the fact that you're finding ways to deal with that are really healthy and working for you, like I cannot applaud you enough. So I had to jump in for that reason. Yay, 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 yay.
I was just going to say that you're getting brownie points from the teacher, because I was asking you if you found books that were deconstructing the guilt that we have over all and the ideas we have about relationships growing up when you're conservative Christian. And you went straight to two sex books about women's pleasure. So like, what more do I have to say? But no, but if you come up with another book in your thinking, like, oh yeah, this is somebody who left, and I don't even think you have to leave Christianity. I think that it's a redefinition of what Christianity is. My daughter is gay, and people will say that's not in the Bible. And I'm like, really? I think God loves all of us. So I think that actually, we're at an era where we need to redefine some of these ideas that are hurting human beings and keeping them from God. Because I believe that you can have sex in a healthy way in special relationships, and you can be a sexual person, you can masturbate, and that does not take away from your love of God or God's expectations of you. I believe you can be gay and love God. Like, I just think it's crazy that people are feeling like God doesn't love them. God is so much bigger than our human conception of what God is. And it makes me sad when people diminish God's love and God's ability to understand his people and to love them, and that we put shame on things he gave us for pleasure and happiness. And does that mean that you go and use it, pardon me, like to the extreme? No, like that's like, but when you actually try to control people like this, you have exactly what happens like with the Amish people, the Rumspringer. You put these kids out, they've got no idea what the real world is, and then they go out and they go crazy, and then they don't even go back to being Amish. Like, it's like we have to start to really break down some of these ideas and see, are they hurting us or are they helping us?
Yeah, 100%. And I'm thankful that I have a family who they have also gone to therapy. They're dealing with their stuff. And so having conversations, while it wasn't always easy as a kid to bring up certain things, It's a lot easier now. It's a lot easier to have conversations and to apologize for mistakes we've made and then learn from their mistakes and actually hear what it is that they're like, we should have said this and done this. That has helped too, where it's like it's recontextualized certain things in different ways. It's brought us closer together. I can't stress it enough. The communication thing is like so important.
And
It's so
like you
important.
said, it was awkward when you were young and you're doing it better now. And I think that's really important for parents to hear. It doesn't, if you didn't start early, it doesn't matter. And it's always
Yeah.
going to be awkward, but you get to a point where it's like, oh, I can actually have this conversation with my dad. How do I, we're going through this troubling time in our relationship. How do I blah, blah, and not be afraid to have conversations. These conversations will always bring families closer together.
Also, as parents, to be open to hearing from a child that maybe is further along the line and or better educated in certain areas. Like I've sent him recommendations for things and been like, I kind of want your take on this, around
That's
sex education. Cause he grew up in the Bible Belt. Both my parents grew up in sheltered homes, but like he specifically grew up in Bible Belt and like purity culture and abstinence is best, and stuff like that. And so it's like, while we've done it separately, we now are at a point where we can come more together and talk about things. And it's still awkward. It's still weird. You don't want to talk to your dad about sex, but it's still, but it's good. It's healthy. And you learn how to navigate it.
That's amazing, Drew. Thank you. And I find myself saying quite a bit that we either grow or we die, right? We only grow up, we don't grow down. And just like a plant or a flower, we grow or we die. So the more that we can all embrace growing in all different kinds of ways, and it doesn't mean that we compromise what our beliefs and values are or whatever we choose for ourselves, but we're learning and growing. And that keeps us alive, healthy, relatable, and well. So I love that you share those kind of things with your dad or with your parents. That's beautiful.
Thank you so much for all of your honesty today and all of your stories. Even growing up as Catholic, it's definitely a different perspective, and I really appreciate it. And I think it's going to help a lot of people.
Thank you guys for having me and letting me share. And thank you guys for your podcast. It's really it's amazing and helpful. And I've shared it with so many friends at this point to talk about things that we grew up with and experiences that they had. And it's what you guys are doing is really cool. And so kudos to you. Applause.
Thank you.
Thank you, Drew.
We appreciate every one of our guests.
Thank you so much. Okay, I loved that interview with Drew. I love hearing from males, first of all. I love hearing from conscious, empowered males who would actually read Emily Nagoski's book, Come As You Are. I'm like, blown away, Drew. Oh my God, I love you. To go from hearing as a young kid about the pie and sexuality in certain ways makes God sad. Like even that somebody has a direct line to how God feels is really kind of sometimes mind blowing that people actually say those things. But, saying something that invokes such guilt and shame. And then here you are of the new place with talking about your wife's pleasure and being okay with that. You've come really in a good, healthy way so far. And so as a relationship therapist, I'm like, you guys are really in a good place. I don't know your wife. I haven't heard from her, but with what you were saying, and when I asked you what a godly relationship was, the very first thing that you said was, let your partner be themselves. Letting your partner be themselves and valuing and loving your partner for their individuality is so important. I have written a coursework on relationships, and I say it's two ships. We are not meant to be one ship and be on one ship and journey these waves. No, it's not how it works. We are two ships. We are connected. There's sometimes that my ship is like this, but I'm going to let me be me and you be you, however you are, and we're going to support each other so we can ride the waves. So I love that you said that. There were so many things that were really important in this conversation. What we didn't bring up, and Stephanie, I want to ask you this. Have you heard of soaking, Steph?
Yes. I actually don't know whether soaking is real. I was
Is
gonna
it a
actually
real
talk
thing?
about that.
Okay, because I was like, "Is that real?" If you
I
wanna explain what it is, but I was just like, "Is that real?" And how confusing that must be that I'm actually if it's true that
Well,
it's
first let's
yeah,
explain what
explain
soaking
it.
is. Soaking
Okay, explain it.
basically, and I don't know whether it's true. I think there's some, I mean, we tried to find it on TikTok and figure out, but I call it TTNN, TikTok News Network. I didn't really find any like real truth there, I don't think. But soaking is essentially this urban legend or actually happens in Mormon community where a man inserts his penis, but because he's not moving in and out of the woman, it doesn't purposefully, it doesn't count as actual sex. It's like he's resting it there and his friends jump on the bed. Is that true? I don't know. There's also a lot of rumors about how in the more evangelical Christian community, other forms of sex, and I do think this is true. Other forms of sex, anal sex and oral sex, become the mode of sexual expression so that you can preserve your virginity, which is so crazy. And I'm just going to say, because statistically, 75% of females do not enjoy anal sex. So, like, whoo, it still counts as sex. If it has sex as its last name, it's sex. Like, you can't get pregnant, but it's still sex. So, in some ways, it's like it's just healthier to, you know, address it that people are going to have sex. In fact, anal sex, there's actually I think they call it saddlebacking. That's the Urban Dictionary term to reference Rick Warren's church, Saddleback Church. So, there's actually a term that people use. Anyway, so that's soaking and saddlebacking.
Thank you for clarifying. And those things are funny to me because those are somebody put parameters on things and then people supposedly buy into it, but it is such a myth, all these things. So it is wise to question, do your research outside of TikTok News Network and to come up with your own parameters, which is what Drew did. And he's researching and doing his own work and understanding and working with his wife. So, amen to all of this. I just feel like he has come so far. So, what a great guest.
Interestingly, soaking and saddlebacking, again, these are very gendered ideas of what is expected of young women because only breaking of the hymen counts as something that is dirty or soils you or is the pie being spit into. Think about that. I mean, I am a feminist. I also believe that men and women are different, but it's absurd that all of these ideas are centered around a female's not having her hymen broken. That's literally what it is. Can you claim that you're still a virgin? Let's not even consider the fact that penetration is happening either of the oral cavity or the anal cavity. So we're not even putting any parameters on young men. I think that's something that we really need to think about how these are constraints on women and not men. And for all of you who are going to jump all over me and say, oh, she's not Christian because she's such a feminist, I really don't care. Why is that constraint on young women and not on young men? Anyway, I'm going to move into my
Wait,
second point.
One
Yeah.
other one other thing I wanna say is that, I'm a queen of metaphors. I love metaphors, but this pie thing, it's like that leaves so much unsaid and so much that these kids are trying to process and think about, and whether it's gum, sneakers, pie, it's like, let's not talk about people's worth in terms of a food that's eaten or spit out or whatever or like let's talk about our worth. Like that's where religion can do such, organized religion, such a beautiful thing to talk about. You are God made and you are beautiful and perfect in the eyes of God, and you have, human gifts from God, and that includes the full spectrum of who we are. So I'm kind of like, let's stop this metaphor thing that is just scary and gross and weird. Let's really have open, real conversations.
That's the perfect intro to my next point, which is my last point. And I want to say that the pie thing was very disturbing to me. I don't know why. I just found it so disturbing that, again, we're talking about females. I love that the female is the pie and she's defiled and she's the one who's broken and damaged, not the guy. Anyway, I digress and I'm going to move on to exactly what you were saying, Dr. Shez, is that conversations, no matter what, in my opinion, and I think I said this yesterday, I refuse to say abstinence only, abstinence only, abstinence only. No, I think parents need to understand that they have to have these conversations with their children, helping them to see their value, not threatening them with you're defiled, you're dirty, you're worthless. That's what's going to happen to you. No, talk about the aspirational, right? And they may choose to have sex. They may choose it in the most healthy way for them. They may be needing to work through something at some point in their life. Maybe, some people do things because who knows what happened to them. I don't know. They choose and then they realize, "Ooh, the hookup culture isn't for me." We've heard that 10 times with our guests. So, you have no idea what your child, as much as you try to shelter your child, you have no idea what your child's going to be working through. But here's the fact. This is a fact. 90% of college students have sex before they graduate college. I think it's 45% go into college having had sex. So somewhere in around 45-50% of students, they are having sex while they are in college, right? Your child lives away from home at that point for the most part. When are you intending to have these conversations? And just like we teach calculus long before a child goes into the working world, just like we teach architecture before kids become architects, we need to be having conversations about healthy relationships with our children. And that includes sex. That includes what's healthy. What does porn culture teach us about sex? And why is that unhealthy? And why does that not serve you and how you need to be equally fulfilled in these relationships? We need to be talking about healthy, unhealthy, red flags, green flags of relationships. We need to be talking about consent. What does that actually look like? We need to be talking about expectations. We need to encourage our children to make a blueprint for what is it that they want before they actually get into a relationship that is going to be sexual. Because if you're not writing that blueprint or that diagram of what you want for yourself, doesn't happen until you're in a relationship, you're going to be swayed by the emotions of the relationship that you're in, rather than being authentic to who you are before you get swept up in the emotional tide of relationships. So there are so many reasons that parents have to be having these conversations, have to be open and swallow your humility and your pride in talking about sex. Understand that, hey, our values say that we don't have sex until marriage, but I understand that that's a goal. And that may not be the case, but let's talk about what is it you want? How do you value yourself? How do you want to be seen? Yada, yada, yada. I'm going to get off my soapbox now, but yeah.
I wanted to say that too. Here's the truth. Parents don't know how to talk, and if your only experience is a pie conversation or something that you were exposed to, how are they supposed to learn? So thus come in the 7 on Sundays girls, women who are really wanting to help parents know how to do this, because it doesn't have to be really hard. It also doesn't have to be as round the bush as a pie conversation. Like, there are ways to do this, and we want to help you with that. We just want to put out there that we want to help people. We want to help young people. We want to help parents with how to do this stuff. And our book will have that, but we also have workshops that are going to help with that. So just keep that in mind. Please join us so that we can keep these conversations going and have much better metaphors than a spitted in pie.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of 7 on Sundays.
The 7 on Sundays podcast represents the opinions of Dr. Shez Libby and Stephanie Boy based on our experience. It also shares the stories, behaviors, and opinions of our guests that we do not necessarily condone or view as healthy. 7 on Sundays is an open forum to discuss what is happening with our listening audience. Some names and details of our guest stories have been changed to protect their anonymity. This podcast is not a substitute for mental health treatment. If you are in crisis and in need of mental health support, please call 988, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. It is free and confidential.
join the conversation and connect with us through our website, 7onsundays.com. That's the number 7onsundays.com. We encourage everyone to do their own research. Thank you and be well.